Today we have a really great opportunity, everyone, and I'm really excited about it. I'm excited about being here, and I'm excited that our webinar has gotten this momentum going, and that many of you are joining us for the second or third time. And the whole goal of our webinars is really to be able to give to the community and to reach out to all of you. Most of us are spending the entirety of our day basically inside, and to be able to have this community where we can reach out and hopefully provide some insight to everybody from these different panelists that come on, to give you something to take home and to perhaps practice your lives a little bit differently, and to have some skills and some knowledge to be able to interact with your loved ones differently. And today we're talking about some very particular loved ones, some small loved ones. And we're all experiencing this big challenge of parenting within this new arrangement. That those challenges can be everything from homeschooling, or as sometimes we call it in our house, crisis schooling, to everything in terms of communication and parenting, and our communication with our partner or our spouse or our boyfriend or girlfriend. Um, and for those of us who are parenting alone or mostly by ourselves, it poses a greater challenge. So today we have a wonderful guest on the show. We're welcoming on the show Vigna Bosson. Dr. Bosson is a licensed clinical psychologist, and she has a particular expertise in many things, particularly management of anxiety and trauma, but also has an expertise in parenting, and specifically bringing this practice of mindfulness, being able to bring yourself back and accept and be present in the moment, and using those skills and that way of being in parenting. So welcoming Julia to the show and to our webinar today. Julia, I don't see her here.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Let's see.
There she is.
Ha.
There she
Hello.
is.
Good to see you.
Yeah, look, there was our mindful moment already.
Don't panic.
Don't panic. So, I think, but it's true, right? There's all these moments like this, throughout the day. There's all these kind of moments that don't go as we plan, right?
It's true.
Yeah. And with kids, it's just even more so that way. And I know you have 3 adorable kids that, hopefully our kids won't be popping across behind the screen. We won't have like that CNN moment in the next.
I've locked the door.
Okay, good.
I'm safe.
Awesome. Although, it's sort of what's happening these days. So how has it been for you? I mean, how's it been? How are things with your lovely family?
Thank you for asking. They're okay. I think we have good days and we have less good days. There are times when I look at the kids and I think, my gosh, kids are so incredibly resilient. This is amazing. And then there are other times when I look at them and I think, wow, this behavior clearly indicates that they are struggling deeply.
Right. So one of the things, I think you're already pointing out is that, sometimes it's hard to tell how kids are doing with all this. It's hard to tell all the time. And I think, what's remarkable to me is, kids will just come out at the last minute and say something, that they're worried about a particular thing. So that's true. And like, there's ups and downs.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so when you think about this idea of mindful parenting, what is that? How does that correspond to your life and to how you parent?
Well, Jonathan, when we talk about bringing the principles of mindfulness to parenting, really what we're talking about is bringing that same intentional, non-judgmental, present-focused awareness to as many of our exchanges with our kids as possible. And I was going to say to all of our exchanges with our kids, but I think realistically no one is 100% mindful all the time. And I think that's important to acknowledge. But really the idea is that if we can increase our awareness in our interactions with our children, both for what's happening inwardly, so what we're experiencing, and then also what's going on with the child, then perhaps we have a better chance of, in a moment of stress, seeing all of the options that we have sort of clearly in front of us, and then maybe responding with intention rather than reacting mindlessly, as can often happen. Now,
Yeah.
doing this, increasing this sort of sense of steady amidst the chaos that is parenting, can increase our sense of control. And when we increase our sense of control, we decrease our sense of stress.
Right. So it's getting better at practicing in the present moment, readjusting to how you're responding to stress in the parenting with parenting.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How
And
so? You know, I mean, this is something that I totally relate to because we are all parenting a lot more than we did, say a month ago. How does that, so how do you? Well, first of all, let me ask you a question. In your own work as your own in your life as a parent, how do you get better at even just noticing those moments, or seeing them coming or anticipating them?
yeah, well, one thing I will say is mindfulness is called a practice for a reason, right? It is not something that you can sort of achieve and attain and put up on your shelf and say, look, I I'm mindful. See that, right? It's something that we commit and recommit to. Really, we have the opportunity to do that every moment of every day. That is the essence of mindfulness.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
and
it's funny. Sorry, I was just thinking too. I like the way you're talking about it too, because I think a lot of parents or just people trying to, practicing mindfulness, whether they're doing it on their own or they're using an app like Headspace or something like that. I think, people get frustrated because they try to quote unquote be mindful, try to find a sense of calm in these moments, and then when it doesn't work, they really get frustrated. So I like the idea that what we're talking about is a practice, that it might be something that you have to return to. You
yes,
know,
absolutely.
and last week we had on Katie Krimmer, who is a mindfulness coach and is a therapist at Union Square Practice, but also started Grow Space. And she was talking about what mindfulness is. Before we even get into parenting, they're like, what is mindfulness? What is mindfulness to you? Not even applying it to parenting yet, but just thinking about it as the thing. How would you describe mindfulness?
I would say mindfulness is synonymous with awareness, and it's a particular type of awareness. It is on purpose, so it's intentional, and it's non judgmental. And that's a really important piece that is often very difficult to embody, right? Judgments are interwoven into every aspect of our lives. Hey, I like your shirt, right? I mean, that
Thanks, thank you.
judgment, but still, that was a judgment. And so it's paying attention and being aware of what's happening and simply observing and describing it without saying that's good or that's bad or that's damaging or whatever other story your mind might tell you in a given moment.
So how does that work in a moment, say, where a kid's really frustrated with their online learning thing that they're doing, or they're just having some kind of meltdown, or two kids are fighting? How does that, how do you become aware of it, and what do you do?
So if we're looking at, well, I think there are a couple of different components here. If probably a lot of people are aware of the child's frustration, right, or undesirable behavior, um, and then if the question is how do you respond to it, I think there are a couple of different tacks that I like to take. One is the idea, something I say to myself and something that people I work with say to themselves is take a beat, take a breath, right? That's just give yourself a pause, get a little bit of distance from whatever it is, whatever sort of monster is emerging from the tiny human in front of you that typically is lovely, or whatever monster is starting to emerge in yourself, right? Um, and then there is the idea of dropping in. Okay, dropping in is if you practice mindfulness, if you read about mindfulness, you've heard this phrase. It's basically the idea of making full contact with the given moment. And you can do that by kind of checking in with your body in some ways. And actually, we can even just do it right now. So, for example, something I say to myself often is, are my teeth touching? And if they are, I like to create just a little bit of space in my.
Well, let's you know what, I love this. Let's actually just like take people, if it's okay with you. Let's just take, we have a bunch of people with us. Let's take them through it, like from top to bottom. So, if you're listening, just, I know a lot of us right now, one of the things we're doing is we're multitasking. We have 15 windows open. We're thinking about all different kinds of things. So I'm all good with that. But let's just take the next, what do you say, Julia? Like 2 minutes?
I mean,
How
not even if we're
Not
dropping
even.
in.
Let's
Yeah,
drop in. Okay, we're dropping in for 60 seconds, folks. So we're going to take the next 60 seconds and let's just pretend, if we can, we might have these small humans around that we have to deal with. But let's just take this next 60 seconds to have Julia just run us through a really practical, something you can take home after this. 60 seconds of what you could do in a moment where you were feeling overwhelmed. And by the way, I think you'd agree, Julia, what you're going to lead us through is something you could do. It doesn't even have to do with parenting. This could be with anything in your life, to
absolutely.
help you, to regain that sense of perspective and to change your view on what's happening. One of my favorite quotes is, things aren't as they are as we are. And so this is a moment that Julia is going to lead us through to help us to take on that viewpoint and to change our perspective on something that we would think is stressful, parenting or otherwise.
Sure. Okay. And I'm going to make it pretty quick because I want it to be able to be easily integratable. So let's just start. Let's take a beat, take a breath. And you can think about sending that breath all the way down to your abdomen. Okay. And now let's just check in. Are your teeth touching? And if they are, maybe just create a little bit of space between your upper jaw and your lower jaw. And where are your shoulders in space? Maybe you can think about sliding them down just a little bit, just away from your ears. And check in with your quadriceps, with your thighs and your glutes. Are they clenched? And if they are, see if they can melt just a little bit. And then go ahead and check down with your calves. Are they tight down around the ankles? See if you can loosen that up. Okay. And now here we are, right? We are in our bodies. We are in this moment. If you've closed your eyes, you're welcome to open them or you're welcome to keep them closed. Just again, getting back here in the moment. There's kind of a saying of getting out of your head and into your body. That's one great way to make contact with this moment, just dropping in. When applied to parenting and in these moments of duress, we'll say, you can take a beat, take a breath, drop in with yourself. And actually, if you start to feel anger rising or frustration, knowing what that feels like for you is really useful. So like, are your fists clenched, right? Are your cheeks getting hot? Is there something internally? Does it feel like there's something rising? Does your throat feel tight or does your stomach feel upset, right? Checking into all of those signs and signals. If we can be more aware of the warning signs before we, quote, lose it, we probably have a better chance of subverting the losing it, right? So, in addition to checking in with yourself and dropping in on the moment for yourself, you can also take a moment and think, what might it feel like to be parented by me right now in this moment? How's my tone of voice? How's the volume of my voice? Um, what's my body position like? What am I towering above this small child, right? Or am I very closed off? How might it feel like to really kind of look at me through my child's eyes? That can help develop an empathy that is really sort of critical to mindful parenting. Um, and in fact, to kind of keeping that steady, right? Again, if this is about, mindful parenting has multiple benefits, right? One is that it's probably more pleasant to be parented by someone who's doing it mindfully. Two is that it's probably more pleasant for us to be practicing from this more aware, steady, non-judgmental angle, right? If we're thinking about decreasing the stress that we're feeling, which in this moment for a lot of us is probably much higher as it relates to parenting than it often is.
No question. And I mean, I think one of the things that you said that really stands out to me is, you know, mindful parenting is certainly so our kids experience something different, but it's also so we experience something way different. And I want to come back to something you said before too, which is I think what something that a lot of parents experience, including myself, is judgment and guilt, right? So we're all going to lose our cool sometimes,
Absolutely.
every single one of us. And more often than not now during this time when there's added stress and added parenting responsibilities, what do you do and what do you say to parents in those moments? Like what should you do both towards your kid but also towards yourself in moments where you do lose you do lose your cool, you're not as mindful and you're not dropping in like we all are, but you're dropping out or whatever the
Yeah.
opposite is.
Yeah. So I would say a couple things. One, please cut yourself some slack, right? This is so hard, and none of us, they always say, "Oh, parenting doesn't come with a manual." That's true, and nor does parenting in a pandemic, right? This is really hard. So please, let's not forget that. And then really, it's just that kind of fits in with the idea of fostering self compassion in every aspect of our life and in our roles as parents. And when we talk about self compassion, really, we're talking about a couple of things: being aware enough to recognize that we're struggling, right? Knowing that that struggling is a shared parental experience, a shared human experience, right? All parents are struggling at some points. All humans are struggling, um, and then being kind to ourselves in that struggle,
And
right?
when you do that, like let's take it through like the average person who's parenting, right? And their kids say, for example, their kids are fighting on the lawn and something breaks. They're fighting in the kitchen and they knock over a glass and it breaks and the kids are screaming and there's glass everywhere, kind of like one of those situations, and they lose it. They yell into the kitchen and their kids are shocked. And how does that parent right now come back from a situation like that? How do they, how should they be more compassionate to themselves? And
Yeah.
if we're doing it from a mindful perspective, how would they, how would they relate to their kids after that?
So the first thing is acknowledging, "Ah, this is hard. That was my grandmother's vase that just broke," right? Acknowledging, "Ah, this really stinks right now," right? To oneself. Um, and then, you know, I know you've been working on not yelling at the kids so much. So I know you're disappointed there too. And then, and look, now you're aware of it. You stopped before you went so much further. Um, and now you can change course, right? That's one of the things that is so important, I think, about and so useful about practicing mindfulness is that it's never too late. If you find yourself going down a path that, maybe you didn't really want to be on, it's never too late to stop as soon as you become aware of it and change course, right? You
Right.
can apologize to the child. You can also, if they've done something that is against the rules, you can acknowledge that too. Um, but really kind of, again, tuning into that moment and perhaps even trying to understand what's going on with them that they're acting in this way.
Right. So
Really,
also some empathy and curiosity about the kids as well. Right. So
absolutely.
thinking about, I mean, I think one of the ways to think about mindful parenting too, as you brought up, is it's actually just about developing, practicing an awareness of yourself.
Mhm.
And as we say in sports and performance, responding rather than reacting. Typically in parenting, we're reacting. And mindful parenting is putting a wedge in there and saying, there's this space between, as Viktor Frankl said, stimulus and response. There's this space between what the kids do and what I do.
Mhm.
And in that space is freedom. And so this is a way of being that allows you to develop that muscle. And I also really appreciate what you're saying, Julia, about that this is a practice. So more on that in a second. Before that, I just want to let everybody know that we want to hear from you guys. There's a Q&A box there, and we're gonna, in a few minutes, we're gonna start passing the mic around to people. But please go ahead and ask questions, or even give us a sense of some of the struggles that you might be experiencing, like a particular situation that you're experiencing with your kids that we could talk through, or something that's going on in terms of your parenting experience overall. Maybe it doesn't even have to be with your kids. Maybe it's something that you're challenged by within yourself. But back to what you were saying, Julia, and so please go ahead and do that. And I think also David, in a minute here, is going to, put up a quote. Oh, so someone's asking me to repeat the quote. The quote is by Viktor Frankl, who's a psychiatrist and a survivor of the Holocaust, and wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And what he said was that between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space there's a choice, and in that choice there's our freedom. Meaning, stimulus, your kid breaks grandmother's vase. Response, I either yell, or I take a moment to drop in, as Julia is suggesting. And that in that space we have a choice to make. And it's really interesting now that I'm saying that out loud. Thank you for that question. Essentially what I think Julia is saying, and what I believe as well, is that the more you make that choice in the direction of dropping in, for example, the more your mind and body recognizes, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do, right? And so if you have a practice which is to yell, or you have a practice which is to stonewall, to kind of shut down and ignore your kids, that might be protective too. So we're not saying don't do that. But if you have the practice of being able to say, oh, okay, I'm supposed to drop in, and you practice it. What I say to athletes all the time, and to everybody that I work with, is, we don't go to the gym, do 3 curls, and look at our bicep and say, why hasn't that grown? Right? It takes time. And so the adjustments that Julia is sharing with everybody about making that adjustment to kind of drop in and get back to your breathing, to test where your body's at, to think about how you want to be, can really be a learned response. What would you say, Julia?
Yes, I completely agree with everything that you said, and I also, I think there are a couple of other factors that are involved as well. We were talking just a moment ago about self compassion, so about you know when you do lose it, or if you've just been really down on yourself about your parenting, kind of what can you do? Um, aside from feeling nice and kind of seeming warm and fuzzy, self compassion is actually pretty practical and useful, because the more that we can treat ourselves with kindness in the face of our shortcomings or inadequacies or failures as a parent and in life, the more likely we are to be able to recover from said shortcomings and missteps, right? And in that way, the more likely we are to be able to make a change.
I love
And
that point. I love that point. Because
yeah,
I think what you're saying is it's also harm reduction in a sense, right?
sure,
So
it's gonna happen. I mean,
yeah, so we're all gonna lose our cool. And what you're saying is, we're basically saving our mileage here. So even if we don't succeed, essentially what we're doing is we're limiting the damage that we do. And by doing that, we're getting to our end goal, whatever that is, in terms of our parenting faster.
that's right. Because when we kick ourselves when we're already down, um, that makes it more likely for us to sort of throw in the towel, which actually can take the form of that disconnecting that you were talking about, right? That just sort of like no longer being really present with your child. And when that happens, not only does the child not get what he or she needs, but then you don't get what you need either. right? Because you've
Yeah, I think there's something that the whole idea here is, as Julia's saying, is being present with our kids. And from one of the things that we used to do in coaching with younger athletes is we would tell coaches, when they felt upset with a kid, that was, a younger kid, that they should take a knee, that they should go and they should kneel down when they talk to the kid,
yeah,
because all of a sudden that physicality changes that presence. And so thinking about that, and that's something I've adapted in my own parenting too.
absolutely
I
get on the child's
get
level.
on the
Yeah.
get on the kid's level immediately, because it just changes the vibe. We actually have some great questions. And so I'll bring one up here, and you and I can talk through it together, because and to everybody listening, your questions are really helpful, because they help us to direct this conversation to things that parents are actually really experiencing, and take these techniques, dropping in the things that Julia's sharing, and make them more practical. So Julia, so someone is asking here, so what do you do if you're trying to parent in a mindful way, but your partner does not and isn't open to it?
Hmm. That's tough, isn't it? Right. Anytime you've got co-parents who are not fully aligned um, in the parenting style. So, and I'll be interested to hear what you say about this too, Jonathan. One thought that comes to my mind, aside from thank you for asking that question to whomever that was, one thought that comes to my mind is keep doing what you're doing. Keep your mindful practices as much as you can. Um, it's not typically it's not ideal for a child to get very mixed messages from parents, and at the same time, um, I think it's got to be better to have one parent parenting mindfully, rather than no parents parenting mindfully. I'm not sure what you would say about that, Vader.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's interesting. We all know the kids. One thing I think about this is just think about, how kids ask certain parents for certain things, right? So my kids definitely know, to ask me for TV time, right? Like that's like a thing. Like we try to limit TV in our house, but that's definitely, they're going to ask me. I'm weaker on that than my wife is, so they know to come to me for that. So basically kids come to parents for different things. And I think that, essentially kids will know, oh, like if I need that respite, that calm, I'm going to go to the parent that has that emotional, that self-regulation to be able to do it. And I completely agree. I think that one of the things that I would say, to Megan, who's asking this question, is, it's excellent that you're doing it. And I think internally I would just focus on the fact that my kids are going to get this energy no matter what my partner does. Now I think there's another question here, which is, couples discord, and that's something that we're all experiencing. Everybody experiences that during this, during, I think, this quarantine. And
I
next
think
week,
for a lot of people more so right now.
completely. Next week we're going to have as I'll talk about later, we're going to have a topic, which is love in the time of Corona, which we're going to be talking about this. But in short, what I would say is, there's a quote by a football coach, Urban Meyer, who said, don't get furious, get curious. And I think that what I'd recommend as a first step, just in the interest of time, is to try our best in those situations to get super curious about what it is that's going on for our partner. That's usually a good step. Is to spend a lot more of our time when we're getting aggravated to think about what's happening for this person, even if we don't say anything. Like even if we don't say anything, just do some deep dives there for figuring out what's happening with this person. And then next week we'll talk in much more detail about certain techniques of couples communication that can help people get on the same page, whether it's talking about parenting or not. We have another question here, that's, a more serious question, but I think it's really useful for us to talk through, Julia, which is, this person is parenting a teen who's going through a severe depression. I notice that I'm panicking when I'm seeing him in pain, and I try to rush in and make his pain better. But how can I use mindful parenting when I notice sudden and dramatic plummets in his mood? So here we have, one we'll talk through together about, so really, what do we do in this is like on the other side of mindful parenting. And actually, Julia and I talked about even kind of breaking this up into two parts at one point, right? So younger kids, because parenting a teen, I have a 9-year-old and an 18-year-old, and parenting kids of those two ages is a different world. So here we're talking about a teenager who's really struggling. How can mindful parenting help us with kids who we have certainly less control over, and are typically experiencing more emotional ups and downs than a younger kid?
And that's, you know what, that's exactly what mindful parenting is useful for, because mindful parenting is not about controlling our child's behavior or our child's emotions, right? Instead, it's about managing our own responses to the child's behavior or emotion states or whatever the child is going through. So I think the fact that this person has even asked this question suggests that he or she at least is fostering some awareness of what's happening internally, right? For the parent, right? I'm gonna say she. I'm gonna take a guess and say she, because I didn't see it, the chat come up. So she's saying, I notice that I'm having this really strong response, and I'm trying to kind of scramble to do something for my child. Um, you know, I would think about that that pause, right? That okay, you feel it's so painful to watch a child hurting, any child, and then your own child. It's almost, it can feel unbearable for people. Um, Take the pause, observe what thoughts are going through your mind. Remember, thoughts are not mandates to act, right? Feelings are not facts. Thoughts are not mandates to act. They are passing states, right? They can enter your consciousness and then they can exit your consciousness. You don't have to hold on to them and necessarily do something with them. So notice, what are the thoughts that I'm having right now? What are the emotions? What is my urge? What do I want to do? Um, and then think about what's the most effective or helpful thing to do, right? Which might not be the same thing as the urge.
Yeah, I think I love what you're saying, Julia, about sort of this beginning, middle, and an end idea. That that one of the things I read a long time ago about mindfulness that I really appreciate was, there was someone put it in terms of an equation, and the equation was pain plus resistance equals suffering. Pain plus resistance equals suffering. And so when we think about these situations, it's painful, incredibly painful to have a child that's hurting in any way, physical or emotionally. It's one of the most unbearable pains we have. But then what we do, as Julia is saying, is that we resist. Rather than going towards it and saying, what am I feeling right now? Where does this live? Is it short or long? Is it deep or shallow? Really kind of making contact with what's happening for you on a deep level, not running from it, going towards it and observing it. And also messaging yourself, as Julia is saying, that all things have a beginning, middle, and an end. That type of response to the pain, that not resisting it, can sometimes diminish the suffering. I know that David actually has a couple people that are interested in catching in receiving the mic, handing the mic, whatever you do, and what do you do when you hand the mic, receive the mic, and receiving the mic. So I think David will go ahead and pass the mic to someone here, so we can have a question or two live before we wrap up. So I think we have Tim here. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, yeah, thanks. So my question was about this. First of all, thanks very much for doing this. This is terrific. About the idea of being non-judgmental in our mindfulness and in our interactions with the kids. As I said in my question, our little ones are a bit bigger, 17, 14, and 12-year-old. And I do try to practice being non-judgmental, but my question was, that can almost seem a little bit dangerous with older ones, because there's a feeling that you get as a parent, also with little ones, but because older ones obviously have more autonomy, it seems important to help them to know right from wrong. And when we're really being non-judgmental, it can sometimes seem difficult that sort of directing them requires judgment, the root of judgmental. And so my question was, how do we how do we incorporate that sense of giving them direction while also trying to remain non-judgmental and not seeming, to be honest, a little squishy?
Yeah, totally. I love this question. And Julia, let me just give my viewpoint, if you don't
Sure,
mind, and I'll pass it over to you.
sure.
You know, one of the things I just want to say really quickly, because it speaks to me so much, Julia, is that I'll tell you, Tim. There's when my younger daughter used to torture my older daughter, and chase her around the house. I don't know how that happened, but she turned into the bully. They were like maybe 4 and I don't know, let's say like 12 or something like that. And um, you know, um, I told my younger daughter, "You're going to get a timeout." And so I give her a timeout because she kept on doing it. And I put her in there, and I was, walking her over to her timeout. She's 4 years old. So I put her in a timeout for, 40 minutes. I'm just kidding. For, 2 or 3 minutes. And, and when she came out, I said, "Okay, so what did you learn?" And she said, mm, "That you were mad." Right. So if you think about like the learning there, basically, I think what the main thing I think about this is, you know, from my perspective, I'm really curious to hear what Julia says. From my perspective, you don't have to change any of your rules to be a mindful parent, right? You don't have to change any of the ways that you respond to the contingencies, how you respond to your teens or whoever about what you want to do. The other example I sometimes cite here is in work I've done with this other technique, motivational interviewing, that we've done with law enforcement. We've brought a perspective of mindfulness and empathy to law enforcement. That only means that these law enforcement officers are changing the way in which they internally respond to people, and the calm and the patience they have as they're talking to people, with the idea that by doing that, Tim, you may have a better outcome in terms of behaviors. So I think that you don't have to be squishy in terms um, of what you do behaviorally. I guess it's being more squishy in terms of your connection to yourself during this, and then also the way in which you decide to communicate rules or responses. That our hope is that some of these techniques bring you more calm in the way you have the discussion. That the what might not change, but the how changes for you and for your kids.
Yeah. So, and what I would just add to that is in some of the mindful parenting literature, and really in mindfulness generally, there is an idea of distinguishing between discernment and judgment. So discernment, just like Jonathan is saying, it does acknowledge that yes, I mean some things um, do need to be distinguished among, right? Safe behavior versus unsafe behavior. Discernment can bring that sort of clarity to the situation. Judgment oftentimes has a little bit more of kind of a criticizing or critical or sort of pejorative um, sense to it, I think. And I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily as helpful as what Jonathan said, but I do think it's an interesting way to kind of think about it for ourselves. Is how can I be discerning and distinguish between things necessarily without being critical and judgmental.
Yeah, and I think, Tim, I love this question, by the way. I guess what I think about is I'm always thinking about this, and I think about this in terms of this coronavirus time, but just in general, is just how do I want my kids to remember me? I'm always thinking about that, and I think, Tim, that I struggle sometimes with the same things you're talking about. Is like, where's the line in terms of how disciplinarian am I going to be? And So I think my main goal is that whatever I decide to do in terms of my response to behavior, that my kids remember that I did it in a calm and connected way as much as possible. Um, Ben Oliva, who's a therapist and coach here, performance coach who works both in sports psychology but also as a therapist, just commented this. I'm looking at the comments, and he said, behavior can be good or bad, but kids can't be. For example, that we're getting frustrated with the behavior, not the kid, and I think that's a good goal. Mindfulness is a method for achieving that, right? That we can have that concept that kids aren't bad, it's just the behavior, but oftentimes our response, I think, when we're not using this mindfulness, can take us off track. Okay, I think we have one more question. David, maybe? Yeah, we have Gina here with us.
Hi. Can you
Hey,
hear me?
Gina.
Hi. I was just asking about, I'm in lockdown with two younger children, 4.5 and 6.5, and the 6.5-year-old, she has a lot of anxiety, and so I try to use some mindfulness techniques with her, and that works with her, right? Like I can get her, we can use techniques where we're trying to be aware of her body and breathe, and then my younger kid, though, since we've been in lockdown, is just expressing a ton of anger and frustration, hitting, calling names, and it's not totally new behavior, but it's really increased. And so I can't, the same stuff isn't working with him. Like I can't get through in terms of getting him to take a breath, slow down. So I just wondered if there are other techniques you might suggest for young children and exhibiting that kind of behavior that's like, really peaked over the past couple of weeks since everything changed so dramatically. Thanks.
Do you have a sense of where for him that behavior is coming from? Is it missing his routines or missing his friends if he's in a preschool program, or
I think it's in part because we're being more strict with the homeschooling with the older kid, because her school's being more rigorous, right? So and we're both working full time in the background. So and so I'm part of it is probably attention and him feeling. So I'm trying to spend more focused time with him, but it's just hard to juggle everything right now, and it's not always possible. So
no kidding. I mean, kudos to you for doing the best you can and for finding 45 minutes to sit on this discussion. That's awesome. I really like the idea of, whenever possible, taking 5 or even 10 minutes to put your full attention into one child. So maybe this is during bath time, maybe it's while he's eating a snack, right? Maybe it's reading a story or playing with Legos or whatever it is. And I recognize that that's easier said than done. As Jonathan mentioned, I have 3 kids also, and so I get it. And if you can really fully be 100% present with that one child, even for a little bit, that actually can sort of sustain the child, maybe until the evening, when maybe the other parent involved could give 10 minutes undivided attention. Jonathan, I don't know if you have anything to
No,
add there.
I love that. I think you're on the right track, Gina, actually, because I think that what we tend to do is we tend to just respond in a way that's about trying to change behavior, but that really most of the time just having that focused attention is key. And in general, I mean, Gina, this is a great question, and actually it's going to be a topic we're going to later on down the line have our whole child group come in and talk specifically about that, probably 2 or 3 webinars down the road. In general, I think that what's most important in any kind of parenting situation, that most of the research says that the guidelines are essentially to ignore behavior you don't want to see and reinforce behavior you want to see. Meaning, behavior that when kids are acting out, generally speaking, it's helpful to just not pay attention to it as much as possible. And now I know that's harder said than done. But also to reinforce what you want to see. So even just, when your kid is peacefully playing, every time you notice that, go over and spend a ton of time when you see that. And that so much learning will happen there. We're gonna have to wrap up our conversation, even though I'd love it to go on. And I just want to thank Julia, because it was so great to have your insights here. And you just absolutely you model it, even in the way you answer this question. So, really appreciate you coming on.
Don't put a camera in my house.
What's that? Yeah, no, we'll take the cameras. We'll take the Union Square Practice cameras out of your house, Julia. But thank you for coming on. If you have questions or you want to ask Julia some other questions, here's her email: julia.v.bosson@Union Square Practice. Julia, as I said, is psychologist at the practice, and she's a expert on parenting and mindful parenting. Please tune in next week. We have a wonderful guest, Melissa Thoen, who's coming on and talking about, she's a couples and family and sex therapist. And will be talking to us about a topic that almost all of us are interested in, love in the age of the quarantine. So we're going to talk about what it's like to be a person in any kind of relationship or trying to be in a relationship during this hectic and crazy time. So please tune in next week, Monday at 10:30 a.m. And here's the quote. So you asked for it, you got it. Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So thank you, Julia, for allowing us more chance to make the kind of choices we'd like to make with our kids. Good luck to you all on your parenting journey over this crazy couple of months. And we look forward to seeing you next Monday at 10:30.
Thank you all.